Okay, it is 1:08. Let's go ahead and get started. I'll go ahead and just pass this straight to Elizabeth, and we can get started.
Thank you. Hello, Commissioners. I'm here to help you understand a very small piece of the electioneering laws when when you're a candidate. And it has to be one of the most convoluted definitions I've come across. And so I'm going to try to walk you through it, but I don't want you to get too caught up in the details. I'm going to give you the specifics and also the big picture. You have a PowerPoint.
Is it up? Sorry.
Up behind me. Okay. And I do need the clicker.
Yeah. So wait a sec, I need to share it on Zoom so that Commissioner Klaus can see it.
So this is a statute dealing and defining public service announcements. And the reason it's relevant for all of you commissioners is when you become a candidate, you have to be aware of this provision because it prohibits you from participating in public service announcements. Yes.
Can I ask a question of, is it when we become a candidate or starting on our campaign year? And is it like we become a candidate once we file with the PDC?
So the definition of public service announcements, and I'll.
Just roll the roller ball.
Okay. So what we have here, and it's kind of hard to read because the screen's so far away. But so the elements of so this is we're going to talk about public service announcements, and there's prohibitions on when candidates can and cannot be involved, or how they can be involved in these. And to answer your question, Carolina, excuse me, Commissioner Mejia.
I think it's fine.
It applies during the period beginning January 1st and continuing through the general election for your particular year that you're running for office. So even though you're not going to file until May, but if you know you're going to be running, you need to be complying with it.
Doesn't it say, though, if that official is a candidate?
Pardon me?
It says if that official is a candidate.
Yes.
You're not a candidate until you file with the PDC. Because let's say you weren't going to run for re-election, and you'd be able to keep doing it because you're not at any point. There has to be a point where you become a candidate.
That is a very good question, and there is a definition of candidate which does distinguish, when you file or when you announce, become known, if it's your intention to be a candidate that year. But for purposes of this particular prohibition, they're clearly stating that you cannot do these things between January 1st and continuing through the general election. So you could make the argument, well, candidates defined over here, and so I'm not a candidate yet, if you want to have that
Gray area.
Because
there are people that declare themselves before, like in the fall.
Right.
And then they wouldn't have to follow this until January 1st.
Right.
That's why I think the January 1st is there.
Yeah.
I would argue that you're not a candidate until and when you announce, that triggers the PDC filing. So it is the announcement, but you're right, it's probably not worth.
It doesn't necessarily be a PDC filing, it could just simply be a public announcement. Mm-hmm. My personal advice on the conservative side, if you know you're going to be a candidate, just start January 1st and be in compliance. Otherwise, you may have someone challenge you.
That's election advice, not legal advice.
Pardon me?
That's election advice, not legal advice, though.
Well, I'm trying to help you understand. Well, it is legal advice because I'm interpreting the statute. But anyway, call it electioneering advice, or I don't want to be electioneering advice because that's really not what we're here for.
Yeah.
I'm just advising you as your commissioners, when this period in your time comes in your, for you two, you're gonna be running for election next year, perhaps.
This year.
And you need to be aware, because these things, mix in with your regular duty.
So no PSAs. PSAs are defined by these 5
Wait till
definitions.
it's
Okay.
on the-
Well, the big thing is this section does not apply to public service announcements that are part of your regular duties. I mean, that,
Well, you,
okay.
there's a lot of nuances in how to apply this. So I'm gonna try to take you through that. And I'm happy for questions, but, so there's elements of the prohibition, public service. You have to be a candidate, in the particular year that the prohibition applies, which is January 1st through the general election. And what it says is you cannot appear or speak in a public service announcement. However, that prohibition does not apply to public service announcements that are part of the regular duties of that office. If the particular candidate is not mentioned or visually displayed in that particular PSA. So the idea is,
If the name is not mentioned or visually displayed, but the candidate or the person, commissioner could be.
well,
visually
if you're a
displayed.
candidate, you cannot be appearing in a regular, in a PSA that is not covered by this prohibition.
And I'm
Because
happy
it
to,
says, beginning, so the first rule is, you can't appear or speak in a public service announcement that is broadcast, distributed in any way if you're a candidate. This section does not apply to public service announcements that are part of the regular duties, so long as the candidate is not mentioned or visually displayed in that particular PSA.
It says, so long as the name of the official is not in the announcement.
Or the officer. The name
And
of the
it
official.
only
Name of the
displays
official.
the office or office seal or logo, and do not mention or visually display the name of the official or officer.
and I can provide an example of how I handled it 4 times over 12 years that I ran for office. So published a newsletter that went out to a mailing list from the county. The change, it always had my photo up on the top of the masthead, and then would be, District 1, Commissioner newsletter, Robert Gelder, that type of thing. So what happened was January 1, the newsletters, I would not have my image there. My picture would not be on the top of the newsletter. It would not necessarily have my name on the top of the newsletter. But it would have District 1 newsletter, and then the articles were written in a way that it wasn't said that Commissioner Robert Gelder said X, Y, or Z. They just became more factual. They just became talking about things that were happening in the district. So you could still do that outreach, but you just took yourself out of that. So you were not using it as a platform to personally promote.
Yeah, so and you shouldn't be doing that in off years anyways. I mean, you should never be using the county to promote your office or your candidacy, or so election year or not election year, that should be. Are we municipal officers?
Yes.
Doesn't municipal mean city?
No, it's broader than that. It
Okay.
also includes counties.
How does this apply to other elected officials like the sheriff?
It would apply to them too.
That doesn't really seem to be. I mean, how is this
How does it not?
yeah, I
apply?
mean, how often did you campaign in your sheriff's uniform?
7 days a week.
Yeah.
24 hours.
It does apply to all elected officials. So this is the statutory definition. There's some elements to it. what is a public service announcement, what are regular duties? And so we're gonna go into that in the next next series of slides. So, we want to understand what are the regular duties of the commissioners with respect to public service announcements. And we have a definition for normal and regular conduct that I'm going to draw upon. So the normal and regular conduct of the county commissioners is, or for any official, means that which is lawful for your office and specifically authorized either expressly or by implication, and usual. It's not something out of the ordinary that you're doing, but it's usual everyday work that you're doing. And the reason, so we want to keep that in mind. And then I have some examples, and then I have an advisory opinion that applies to legislative bodies on regular and normal conduct. But I do want to share it with you because I think by analogy it will help you understand what that means. So the Legislative Ethics Board gave an opinion on whether voter registration, soliciting voter registration, soliciting people to do certain things to vote, was a normal and regular conduct of the legislative body of the state, the state, the House and the Senate. And it's legislative. And I point that out because you are also a legislative body too. So it's a good analogy in terms of what's regular and normal conduct for you. So in this particular example, it said, may a legislator mail unsolicited voter registration materials at public expense, urging constituents to register and return their ballot to the Secretary of State. And the advisor, the ethics board said, no, a legislative body, that's not the regular and normal duties of a legislative body. It is, however, would be a regular and normal conduct or duty of the auditor's office because they are charged with running elections. And so they have an interest in helping people get registered to vote and things like that. So that this is an example of, well, the county does this stuff, but your particular role and your particular authorities don't control elections. So in this opinion, it suggests that it's not that you can't say, if you're putting out, reminding people to vote, election day's coming up, vote. But if you're asking them to do certain things, like this particular example, a legislator was providing unsolicited materials at public expense. That's another thing. I mean, it's not like you can't do certain things in private as a candidate, but when you're acting in your regular and usual course of conduct as a county commissioner, the county commissioners, this would not be seen as a regular duty of yours to solicit and put out information about voting. So that's just an example of, while we're a county and you think, well, we do this, you have to think more narrowly in terms of what your statutory duties and responsibilities are. Another example to say, well, I'm not going to get mixed up. But anyway, so that's just a context to keep in mind when you're thinking, is this regular and normal conduct? You look at your duties that you are assigned to and you regularly do. And now we're going to get into the definition of this particular public service announcement. What is interesting is this particular definition was adopted prior to the public service announcement law and it was adopted for a different statute about electioneering activities. So that's why this definition is a little bit hard to understand because it has several elements to it. And, each element of this definition we're going to go through has to be in place before that particular communication is considered a public service announcement. So the first element is, and there's 7 of them. So all these elements have to be part of the public service announcement. I know it's a little bit technical, a little bit detailed. I'm just trying to give you the information so we can work with your staff and make sure that everything is consistent when it goes out. So the first element is that the communication benefits or promotes health, safety, welfare, or nonprofit community events. So the question is the communication designed to benefit or promote the community's health, safety, welfare, or non-community events? Examples include such things as traffic safety messages by transportation agencies, which would be under your umbrella because you manage public works and they manage the roads and things like that in your county. Reminders to return ballots by election agencies, that would be appropriate for the auditor. Public safety warnings and other similar public health and safety welfare notice, if they're part of the regular conduct of the agency. So public health has regular duties about public health and whatever their routine practices are in sending out information about that would be an element, could be an element of a public, is an element of a public service announcement. So if all this is going on, then it satisfies the first element. If none of these things are going on, then it is not considered a public service announcement. Even if one element is missing and everything else and all the other elements are checked, it's still not a public service announcement. Because each and every element has to be present. So you have to kind of go through. So that's why I say if the answer is no, if communication doesn't promote public health or safety, then the communication is not a public service announcement. If it does, then you go to the next element, which is kind of I thought, an interesting one. Is the communication not selling a product or service? So if you're not selling a product or service in your announcement, then that satisfies that second element. If it is selling a product or service, then it doesn't satisfy that element, and it's not a public service announcement, which is interesting. So, third element, the communication is sponsored by an organization with a history of routinely providing community outreach in the service area. I'm a little confused by that. And I don't have a good example of somebody else that, like, there's other agencies in town that might be promoting different things. And I don't know if that would be a announcement that the county would incorporate.
Sure.
But I won't take up too much time on that. That's just another element. And then the next page, we still have more elements. I forgot to put that up there. Okay.
That sounds like it's backwards to me.
What?
That last one.
Yeah, that was the,
If the communication is not sponsored by an organization, like, but if the answer is no, it's not a PSA. So to be
Right.
a PSA, it must be sponsored by an organization with a history?
well, that's a good question. That's what it says.
Doesn't
Would
make any
the
sense.
county not
I
be
know.
considered an organization?
Pardon me?
Would the county not be considered an organization?
Well,
What is sponsored by?
routinely providing,
Or is it like a nonprofit that the county has worked with for years? Is it like,
But this is saying it has to be that to be a PSA, so that.
yeah,
It's an,
well, it seems like it has to be some sort of government organization because it applies to government officials.
So organization could be a county or a state agency or a, I mean, this is a broadly written WAC. I'm much more confused by the prior one, but
The not selling a product?
yeah, if it's not selling a product,
Which is good, because the idea is that you're putting out an announcement for the
It-
benefit of the public.
so if the answer is no, yes, we are selling a product, it's not a PSA.
So if we're not selling a product,
Okay, are we selling a
if
product?
we are selling a product, I know that one's a little confusing. If
Oh,
we
it's
are
very
selling a
confusing.
product, then it is not a
This is
PSA.
saying,
But the county is an
double
organization,
negative.
so.
That's a double negative.
is this something that was taken from like a PowerPoint that was taken from like WASAC, or is this something that,
No, it's something that I put together.
okay.
Whack.
I don't know if it's saying something, I look up WAC 390-05525, and it says, the definition of a public service announcement is that it is is something where it is sponsored by an organization with a history of routinely providing the community such, so it doesn't, is that saying the opposite of what the WAC says?
Well, no, so the definition is, which element are you reading?
The last one that we're arguing about is not a PSA. You're saying it is not a PSA if it is communication is sponsored by an organization. I look up the WAC and I think it's saying that it is a PSA.
No, I'm saying if, I think the way I'm answering it is confusing. If the communication is sponsored by an organization with a history, then that you meet that element. But if it is a communication that is not sponsored by an organization, then you don't satisfy that element.
Let's take a simple example. It's very routine for commissioners to do some type of announcement that is basically saying, come to the county fair. So,
Pancake breakfast.
yeah, come to the pancake breakfast at the county fair. Totally normal, they do that every year. Does it benefit or promote a nonprofit community event? Yes. Is it selling a product or service? No.
Selling pancakes.
You're not selling anything though, but
know they were
it's
free
not a
pancakes.
sales pitch, so
Right.
then it's
should be
still,
sold.
yes.
Right.
Is it sponsored by an organization? It's sponsored by the county, so yes. Is the communication of primary interest to the public and not targeted? Yes. Is the communication controlled or paid for by a PAC or your campaign committee? No. Is the communication subject to policies of the county? Yes. And was it created 6 months before you became a candidate? More than 6 months? No. So come to the county fair would basically be a public service announcement. Is that,
If it was, I think the last one's interesting too. If it was made, if it includes a picture candidate that was taken 6 months ahead of time.
right?
Yeah.
Well,
That was a nice
it would
example.
include a commissioner standing up and saying, come to the pancake breakfast.
Yeah.
Hey,
It would include them.
where it gets really confusing is when, technology moves much faster than these confusing rules. And then you come into a situation where, you've got an official, social media page and you share something from the Public Works Department saying, road closure or something like that. And so this is saying,
It's a public
know,
service announcement.
But you're not sharing it as you're just sharing public information that the county puts out, and I mean, by some of these strict rules, maybe somebody could raise an eyebrow at it, but I really don't think that would even matter or apply or,
I do have, after we finish just going through the elements, just so you're aware of what the elements are, the next series of slides I'm going to show you is how the PDC interprets this particular definition, which is speaking to some of your thoughts, I think.
Okay.
So, thank you, Robin. I appreciated that example because this is, it's nice to have a concrete example because I've been trying to get my head around this silly definition for a while. I'm still struggling. But unfortunately, it's there. But the big thing is, I think if you think of it, the big picture, what are they trying to do? They're not trying, the ultimate prohibition against the county as a whole is you cannot use public resources to support a candidate or a ballot proposition. So that's why there are references to pictures, names, being associated with the public service announcement, has that flavor of we're using public money, we're putting out a public service announcement, and we're happening to put a little edge for this particular candidate. Yes.
Can I ask a question in terms of like, I mean, then isn't our Facebook pages that, right? Because it's got our picture on it and it's got our name on there and.
You mean your official county
Yes.
Facebook page would be different than a campaign or a personal?
Yeah, but like, you know, it still has our picture, it still has our name on there and,
Everything we post on there is a piece of information of
Yeah.
some kind or other that relates to county business
Yeah,
that could be
there's an
called.
open house in Grand Mount to talk about the Grand Mount subdivision. Show up.
come join us at the pancake breakfast,
Yeah.
or.
Roads closed.
Yeah.
Get your flu shots.
Yeah, let's go backwards. Like, what could I say that's not a public service announcement on that candidate's county-sponsored Facebook page?
Well, some of the things you're talking about don't amount to public service. It's not getting interest out to the public about certain things. But let me just go through what isn't included. Because when you're talking about county business, when you're talking about, well, let me go through how the PDC talks about, and there's a distinction between factual information and then distinction about sharing, go get your flu shots, things like that. For supporting nonprofits. So I think we've gone through the elements. Thank you, Robin. We'll keep that in the back of your head when you're thinking about this. And, okay, the last one, well, this is, am I going backwards?
No, just keep going. I think we did get caught up. This gets into the PDC.
Yeah, okay. So the PDC recognized that this definition was adopted for a different law, and it was adopted 5 years before the actual adoption of the public service announcement prohibition. So they have looked at a couple of things, and they have determined that CSA would not include, and these are things that you would normally post on your Facebook page about what's happening in the county, is news items or editorials that have primary interest to the general public in a news medium controlled, well, this is something different, by a person whose business is that news medium and not controlled by the candidate or committee. If you are invited to participate in a hosted radio or television talk show, and you're not being paid by the show sponsor, which is primary interest to the general public in a news medium controlled by that business, and not controlled by the candidate, then that's okay too. You can be doing this during the January.
And the only difference would be on one radio, you're on a radio show and you say, I am here as Commissioner so-and-so, then that applies. But if you say, I'm Commissioner so-and-so, but I'm not here as Commissioner so-and-so, right? I mean, then it's a different ballgame. You can say what,
Well, yeah. Yeah, but this one is saying, if you're a public official, you've been invited, you're not you're not getting paid, and it's not controlled, and the show is not controlled by you or the committee. And the PDC, that can be a PSA.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't be subject to the PSA prohibition. If it's an open news or a press conference,
Can you clarify what open news means? Can you clarify what open news means?
well, I would have to look up the definition, but I'm guessing it's, or press conference. If,
Open news conference or open press conference?
Oh,
What's
Open.
Yeah,
It's a news or press conference and it's open.
and it would, that would be when it's not controlled by the government or the candidate themselves.
It's not Megan doing it, it's,
Not that we control Megan.
yeah, well,
So, I mean, that's,
I mean, you do.
we
press
have
conference.
no, Megan's under the county commissioner or the county manager.
Who reports to you.
As a board, not as a person. So I have no control over what Megan does.
Counties are a little different than the cities. And while one commissioner can't make that kind of decision, it is,
Yeah. She doesn't directly report to me, and I can't hire or fire her without, you know,
So we can, I don't know how press conferences work around. But we can, I mean, I can work with staff, you know, we're coming up with specific examples of what you're doing. Then we can really apply these elements and exemptions. I'm just gonna keep going because I wanna at least give you all the information before.
Can Megan ask a question real quick?
What I'd really like to do is take the information that Elizabeth is bringing us and build a policy, because it'll direct my work too. Like coffee with the commissioner, I wanna get that specific. I need to know, is that
Yeah.
considered a PSA? Yeah, if Commissioner Fournier is gonna be doing a coffee with the commissioner on flu shots, like, that's a PSA, right?
However, if it's news items, that are of primary interest to the general public in a news medium, and it's not controlled by the candidate, it's not a PSA.
But that's different than a coffee with commissioner. So like, I wanna get very specific and get Elizabeth to say yes, no, so that we know moving forward, and the aides, what can go out on the social media, what we can do as far as coffee with commissioner, or the insider, or Friday Five. So all these things that we do, which is regular business, but if it has one of the candidates' photos on it, can we put it on there? So I'd really like to get that specific, once we get the general overview from Elizabeth, and then I can get that
Right.
policy right.
So we'll have, I appreciate your questions and curiosity.
Seems like King County or somewhere like that's gotta have a policy.
What?
Like other counties would have
King
policies.
County, yeah, gotta have a policy on this.
Possibly,
All the candidates they have to deal with, and,
yeah,
It's always a good
or it might be
place to start.
internal.
What's everyone
might
else
not
doing?
be public.
yeah, it might be true.
So it's a, yeah. I do think as we work with examples and what your daily business is, I think it's gonna become more clear. I'm just not familiar with all of the stuff that you do that way, so I didn't come up with good examples like Robin did. But, so, press conferences, news releases, newsletters. Okay, so news releases and newsletters. So again, they're going for factual information, not trying to promote anything. Okay, live speeches. So it's interesting because these are just live speeches, they're not being broadcasted necessarily, which is an element of a public service announcement too. So that's why they're saying live speeches, but if a part of that speech or testimony is recorded and later used, then that particular recording will have a different standard. Testimony at the state legislatures. Rallies, go to rallies. Responses to a specific inquiry, because you're not promoting anything, you're responding to a question.
Now, if your testimony or presence at a rally ends up in the news, then you can use the news article.
Well, there's
On your-
potentially,
so-
potentially, and then there is some caveat that you have to contact the news agency. I didn't put that little element in there, but there is a, potentially, that could become a PSA. But that's why if you're responding rather than promoting, that's not a PSA. That's the distinction there. Communications made as part of litigation. Okay, so if you're in litigation and information comes out about that and your picture's on the front page of the paper, that's not a PSA. Public agency websites. So, talking about your official Facebook pages. It sounds like a lot of times you're sharing, have a meeting, either the topic that we're going to be talking about. And I don't know, I'm sorry, I don't follow you guys on Facebook. So anyway, as it says, if a web page contained a separate PSA, so if you do include information about public service announcements, then you are going to need to take that out of your public face page if you're a candidate during this time. That's how I would
Just
interpret
put
the
not a
PDC.
PSA before you post anything.
This is what they're saying, that they recognize that you're going to have public agency websites, that they're okay as long as there's not PSAs on it, basically. Okay. Now we're getting into personal communication, not using public facilities, including personal social media, such as your personal emails, personal Facebook pages, and not published or sponsored by a public agency. So what you do on your own personal social media, your own personal Facebook page, you're not subject to this PSA prohibition. One caveat I have in the end of this is, and I picked it up from a different source, if your personal Facebook page identifies you as Thurston County Commissioner Menzer from District Number 4, District Number 3, you need to have some sort of disclaimer in there that this particular page is not my official Facebook page, it is my own personal Facebook page. That makes sense?
I don't even have my job title on there. I'm good.
Okay, here's my last slide. There's a legislative advisory opinion about the topics of press releases, social media posts, speeches, talking points during this period of time. This is for the state legislature. So there's seven factors to. So the question is, what factors must be considered when determining during the election year freeze? The legislatures have some prohibition on certain things. Whether state resources can be used to issue press releases, post material on websites or social media pages, or draft speeches and talking points. And the summary is, for press releases, speech, and talking points drafting, 7 factors are being considered. And these factors are all about, is this being colored to promote this particular candidate or not? And so the first factor is a triggering circumstance. Is it something normal in your regular work? Like, let's say we have a big storm coming up, and it's nothing that was controlled by you, so that's what prompted this particular press release. That's what they're going to be looking at. Is there a personal nexus between the candidate or your job and the press release? is the timeliness of it. Is it close to the election, or is it not so close to the election? How relevant is it? And what's the tone and tenor? So if it's just a, factual, this is what's going on, we want to get the word out, or your speech is not about anything that's promoting your particular agenda or calling attention to you. But if it's just your regular working stuff, but if you start getting into talking points about speeches for your campaign, things like that, that's clearly not going to be sanctioned. So this is just a big picture overview. I will be working with staff as well as my team to get these buttoned down a little bit more clearly for everybody. And my suggestion is, if you have any questions about something you're posting with your picture on it, run it by your staff, and then they can, or you can run it by directly with our team. But your staff, we're going to try to work with them so that they get very familiar with these things too.
What does that mean in that summary, personal nexus? That's it's the second factor.
Yes.
What does it mean?
So it's a personal nexus with you and your press release. Is it a personal nexus that works in your official capacity? Like you are in charge of the land use committee, and we're doing a press release on what's happening with the shoreline master program, or something like that. I mean, you're active. Well, you're all active.
Oh, I see. Versus me just promoting something random
Yeah.
that I don't really have a connection to
Right.
through my work.
Right.
Okay, let's wrap this up because I know we have to move the boardroom around and it's 1:50, so I just want to give staff enough time to redo the boardroom for our 2 p.m. meeting. So thank you, Elizabeth, for coming in, and I'm sure our aides will be sending over questions, and at 1:50 we are adjourned. Thank you.